So welcome to our webinar about delivering engaging digital advice experiences brought to you by LivePreso. Our agenda today is I'll give you a quick intro, I'll introduce our guest speakers, I'll then ask them some questions, and today some of their answers will involve some show and tell. So you'll actually see some digital advice experiences in action, and at the end we'll take questions from you. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Aaron Cooper and I'm the co-founder and CEO of LivePreso. And just quickly for those of you who have never heard of LivePreso, this may sound like a strange place to start, but we did not set out to create a software platform for the advice industry. I'd be lying if I said it even crossed our minds when we started the business about 8 years ago. However, I believe that gave us a huge advantage when we did recognise the opportunity to help this industry because we recognised we were solving problems for large sales organisations initially in ways that translate seamlessly to the advice industry, but we were free from the constraints of the way things just have always been done. I guess you could look at it like we bring a unique perspective. The top 4 kind of pain points we address for our domestic and global customers in industries like tech, travel, food and beverage and real estate, the time it takes each salesperson to make a customer relevant presentation, managing brand consistency across the team when everyone is editing documents, the lack of visibility and learnings from knowing how the team and their customers are engaging with the content and making that engagement way more engaging. So they probably sound familiar to you, even though they were the kind of pain points we set out to address for salespeople. But in financial advice, they translate to the time it takes to make client documents when the data is coming from Xplan or wherever else. Consistency in their world is compliance in this industry, although consistency is still very important. Knowing what parts of an SOA or an ROA have been shown by advisors and viewed by clients. That's compliance again, but it's also knowing what parts of the advice story, if you like, resonate. And a much better client experience is the same. It's critical. So LivePreso addresses all these by integrating with Xplan or wherever your data is to automatically create beautiful, compliant, interactive advice documents in seconds instead of hours. We track everything that paraplanners, advisors, and your clients do with the documents so that you have a complete audit trail. And this all typically is saved back into Xplan, so you have all documents and all activity in one place. But making the move to this type of digital-first approach is a journey, and we have 2 gentlemen joining us today with unique perspectives on why that journey is worth it and what the journey looks like. So I'd like to introduce you to Ben Martian, who is the Head of Policy, Strategy and Innovation at the Financial Planning Association of Australia. G'day, Ben.
Hi, Aaron. Hi, everyone.
And Jason Fowler, who is Executive Director of FYG Planners and, full disclosure, a customer of LivePreso. G'day, Jason.
Morning, everyone.
So we'll start broadly and we'll get a bit more granular afterwards. So we'll start with you, Ben. There's a lot of technology available to advisors these days, but let's put the tech itself aside to begin with. What are the key use cases you think technology can impact positively?
I think there's a number. The reality of financial advice is that it's a highly regulated, there's a lot of laws, there's a lot of regulations, and it's impossible for one person, one financial planner, one licensee to keep their head around all of that. And technology enables you to provide compliant advice in that difficult regulatory framework. Additionally, the Corporations Act was introduced in 2001, so 20 plus years ago. And I think, times have changed, times have moved, and what was cutting edge technology back in 2000 is not what cutting edge technology is today. The way consumers engage with every other aspect of their financial position or their life more broadly is not the same as what it did back in 2000, and when a lot of advice processes were starting to be designed and built. And so there's a real opportunity to look at the technology that's available today with fresh eyes and go, how can I leverage these efficient, engaging, much more cost-effective ways to actually produce advice, deliver advice, provide advice to clients than the way we've traditionally done it.
So I'm sure there are plenty of people in the audience who are kind of generally on board with the idea of addressing these kinds of use cases and starting the digital transformation journey for their dealer group, but who are a bit hesitant for a variety of reasons. It's all new. How do we know what to do? Will our people embrace it? Will our clients embrace it? So Jason, as someone who has spearheaded your own digital transformation journey, what advice would you give to those looking to embark on a similar path?
I think, Aaron, just one thing, just picking up on something Ben said, we've been users of Iris and Xplan since the early 2000s, but the way that we, prior to the exercise that we've undertaken and the work we've done with LivePreso, we were still generating an SOA through a wizard-based creation of a Word document, the same as we did 20 years ago. And I think, to Ben's point, that's the real challenge, is that when we were starting to look at a better way to produce advice that was engaging for clients, I think that's the first thing, was, you know, a piece of paper that's 10 pages, 20 pages, 30, whatever long, that reads like a novel is probably not the most engaging way for a client to consume advice. And everything that we looked at prior to the journey that we started with you guys was, how do you take a piece of paper and turn it into a digital asset? And the challenge has been, and the challenge for everyone going on this journey, is to actually rethink that whole paradigm and start to think, how do I deliver advice digitally first and worry about an analog record that I may need for a compliance, if at all I need one, later. And that's been the interesting journey for us. And, you know, full disclosure, we've been working with you guys since April of last year, and it's fair to say I think we just released and pushed version 70 or something this morning. But the first 6 or 7 versions, we got caught in the trap of thinking about how we had produced advice previously and how do we turn that into a digital screen that had some interactivity, rather than think what was the most important information that a client may look to be consuming, and then provide further detail if and when required, so that you can cascade down. Because our profession, the stuff we do, is highly product centric in a lot of cases, unfortunately, and everyone focuses on the detail. And we got caught in that trap initially as well. And so what has been in this evolution as we go on is to think about, how do we re-engage that? And the beauty of LivePreso, apart from the fact that we get that, is that we actually can get instant feedback when we share the documentation or the interaction of that presentation with our clients post-meeting, to actually see what time they spend and where they spend the information and how they interact with the data outside of the meeting. And sometimes that's very different to the way that we interact with it inside the meeting. And so we're already changing our development. We're changing the way that we run meetings, you know, at our retail firm here, with clients on the back of that knowledge and that path that we've taken over these last couple of months. And so, you know, maybe is a good time to have a look at something on a screen. And I'll start with the boring product stuff first, even, and get to the nice looking stuff later. But if I share my screen, hopefully this will work.
Sorry, Jason, while you're getting that. Oh, I'm in a real office. People walking around. No, I was just going to say that's one of the misconceptions about you know, what the regulations require. They don't require all of the nitty-gritty detail to be there. What you're actually trying to get to is client understanding. The client needs to understand the advice that they're providing, and they need to give you consent that they agree to implement that. And a 2D flat piece of paper will help you tick boxes, but it absolutely does not help clients understand the advice they're provided. Not to mention, I've got a planner, and he did a plan for me. And anytime I want to go and have a look at my plan, I've got to walk up to the other end of the house, go to my filing cabinet, go to the very bottom drawer of it, dig around at the very back of it to pull it out. And, you know, the day after I got it, it was out of date, and it's 10 plus years old now. I didn't have kids. I didn't have the job I have now. Paper is not the way to be delivering advice in 2022.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And the beauty of this is that everything that we generate inside LivePreso is captured and useful and retrievable by the client at any point in the future, and every increment of that piece of advice. And that's the exciting part for us, where we will go from an FYG point of view, is how we can incrementally build on this going forward, rather than have to go back and re-look at advice again. So, you know, just this screen here is just a summary information of, you know, our lovely WealthEye clients and Don and Den who have insurance. And this, what we have found when we've been building our data, is to start with high level information and then go for detail if we need it, right? So this quickly says Don's covered on 7 different policies, Den's covered on 4, and Den has no trauma insurance, right? So there maybe is something we talk about. Or these are the sum total. If Don falls off the perch, this is how much money will turn up in life insurance. But if they want to know information, we can simply jump into detail, and here's the 7 policies that are there. That's the premiums, that's how there's paid. Everywhere there's these little eyes, there's more information, so we can jump around and see that this policy has both Don and Den on it. And if I want to see what it is, I go down to the detail. And so it's just being able to capture that information, but quite often in a review, the client doesn't, they may want to jump in and see what the premiums were, but ultimately that's the information that they want from a point of view of the conversation that we're having. And so we've learnt to build on that basis. So I think that's just an example, and we'll show some more, but that's an example of where this can start and where it can go.
I think that's really critical. It's almost like being able to filter that ream of paper to only the information that's actually important, and putting everything else in an appendix. I must admit, when I first received an SOA in a ream of paper, I thought the same thing. If we're going to skip the first 20 pages, then why are they there? Chuck them in an appendix and assume I might look at them one day, rather than putting them there because you feel like you have to, but actually recognising immediately that, no, we're just going to skip those because they're not very important for you to understand, try and understand the advice at least. So, Jason, on coming back to kind of the journey of this that you've been on, how's your team reacted to change? Because there's a lot of people who are used to doing things the same way they've done it since 2001 or whatever it is. So we know that can be a challenge sometimes. So how did that go?
Yeah, well, it's been a challenge, right? So if I can, from an FYG, we've got a network of 40 odd offices across the country, and I think there's 70 or 80 advisors, everyone who's got access to this, and they've all taken these at different stages. And I think one of the challenges in any evolving technology is that you're not going to get 100% of the solution up front, right? But if you actually don't go on a partial journey, you actually don't start to understand the benefits of what you're doing. And so there's particularly one advisor in our office, and there's a couple within have gone, oh, but I can't put this piece of information in, because when we started this, it was really product focused, right? And they went, oh yeah, but that's not what I want to talk about. And I said, yeah, that's cool, I get that. But if we can prove that concept, then we can build out on it, but start to figure out what information clients want, rather than believe that I've got to give them everything, to Ben's point, right? They've got to have enough to understand, but it's got to be in bite-sized pieces. And so it's been a journey, but I think that certainly within FYG, the network, there's more and more client advisors starting to use it. And as they realize the way that they can structure conversations, and that conversations can flow more visually and be more interactive, and that they get instant feedback on the information that the client consumes post the meeting, I think it's been an excellent journey, all right? And it's focused some more of our development on things being more visual, right? I think because a piece of paper becomes very boring and black and white, right? And so, just to share, and I'll jump around here, but just to share another screen, this is our initial crack at how we will display goals to a client. So, very quickly, this is, client's goals. It's got some headings, and but it's color coded, right? Based on, now that's a bit of a manual process at the moment as we get multiple systems to feed into data, but ultimately those colors could change based on what's happening in a portfolio. But very instantly a client can see, well, red's probably not so great. Why is it off track? What have we not done? And we can filter, and we can have those for a period of time. But it's that sort of stuff and that sort of feedback that leads to conversations. right? And for me, advice is all about a conversation. You know, there is stuff that we need to help and get clients to understand, but we also need to understand what's important to them. And the more visual and the more engaging we can make conversations, the better off that those tend to be.
Yeah. And Ben, what else have you seen or heard from people kind of embarking on this journey?
So I'll make 2 points. Firstly, when I started at the FPA about 5-6 years ago, everybody was worried about robots coming and taking over everyone's role. And so we did a big project to try and debunk that myth and demonstrate to members that technology was actually there to make their advice process more efficient and more engaging and more valuable to their clients, which is roughly when we met, Aaron, and I was going through that process.
Yeah.
But the problem that we saw was members did buy into that idea that technology was there to help them, but what they didn't do was figure out what their business processes were and figure out what their advice processes were and think about what was actually the best bit of technology to actually integrate into their business and integrate into their advice process and design it properly. And so I think one message I'd give to everyone listening is you actually have to map it out. You have to actually go through the process of designing your tech stack, designing your business processes and integrating it properly, because otherwise you'll spend money on something that actually makes things more inefficient and potentially makes it more unengaging, and you just end up wasting a lot of time and money. The other thing I'll say is that, you know, if you go back to first principles in terms of the Corporations Act and ASIC's regulatory guidance around how advice is delivered and think about how you might do that with today's technology, you wouldn't be using paper-based documents to produce advice. And the regulator, in fact, says you don't need to use paper at all to produce advice. And so technology like LivePreso, which is live and engaging, but can also be recorded while you are presenting to the client. And the recording can be your statement of advice, because that can be the document. A video is a document. That's a much better way to be providing advice and sharing advice and giving a copy of your record of the statements that you make to provide advice to the client. And so this type of technology is actually useful for taking all of the goals like Jason showed and all of the strategies and all of the products that you're recommending and providing that to the client, but also talking them through the process while presenting that advice to them. And so I think there's massive opportunities in this technology and other bits of technology as well, but this one's pretty good.
Thanks, Ben.
To better engage with clients.
And I think that the other thing that we've learned, just picking up on that, Ben, is that there isn't one solution, right? So it's now about finding, like whilst everything I show today has come from Iris, has come out of Xplan, right? And I literally, this presentation, there's a bunch of slides in it, took 4 minutes to produce, and I could be sitting in front of a client, right? As long as I know, you know, with a quick data check. So that stuff's there, but it's then, once you've built some of that stuff, I mean, we've had some conversations, Aaron, about clients then being able to self-generate some of this, because this information that these modules that we've produced, right, that there's no reason we couldn't put them in behind a portal and give the client the ability to generate them on demand. That is extremely powerful. Not only have we got indications of what clients are consuming of what we've prepackaged, but we then start to get information about what bits they're packaging themselves, and that's got to be valuable for developing, you know, conversations and meaningful conversations that are stuff that the clients want to engage with. I think that's the untapped thing. We haven't even got there yet, but that's the bit that I see is really exciting in this, is that there can be multiple sources. At the moment, we're just using Iris, but there can be multiple sources and feed into this sort of self-generated advice.
So my next question was going to be about that topic, Jason. So how has the client experience changed in your opinion? So obviously you're talking about things that could happen with allowing them to generate their own documents, but specifically, I think we hear a lot about going digital. And in this industry in particular, digital could just mean taking that ream of paper we've been talking about and making it a PDF, which would obviously be a bad idea. Wouldn't really achieve much, I don't think. other than being a bit easier to share around. You wouldn't have to go to the filing cabinet in the back room, Ben. You'd be able to access the PDF, but it'd be the same. You'd have all the other same problems. I feel like interactivity is the real kind of killer feature that digital brings. So how do you think that's impacted your client's experience?
I think that that's 100% true and 100% beneficial and engaging. And the fact that and I'll share one other screen that really highlights that, the fact they can engage with their own data, and you can talk about experiences and things that have gone on in the world, particularly, say, for an easy example of that is a portfolio movement over a period of time, right? Because we have the data, it's one thing we used to use with a piece of paper and say, when the GFC came, average portfolios went down, and if you stuck the distance, this is what your outcome would be. But whilst it was real information, there was a grain of salt in it because it wasn't actually the client's information, right? And so using your technology is being absolutely fantastic for that. So here's a chart that you guys helped us produce, which is for these clients, their journey over a period of time from 2016 to 2022. The different colors represent different entities that hold assets. So husband, wife, and related entity, a super fund or something, and that's been their journey. And when they opened accounts or contributed money, colors pop in. So the reason that this popped up wasn't because markets went fantastic, because they did a rollover from somewhere else or something. But we can go, well, remember when did COVID hit? All right, and we all panicked. That's actually what happened to you, right? This is your account, right? And if we want to, and this is what they were worth, and this is what they got down to, and then we were, maybe panicked. But if we look at the longer picture, right? If I go out a bit further, suddenly they were back where they, basically back where they started. So that sort of conversations that we've had, particularly with volatility around, to be able to show clients their own role and their own situation and where drawdowns have happened and where capital's come in is been massively changed the way conversations have happened. They go, oh yeah, that's right, because we were really concerned, but we needed a car and you told us it was, going to impact, and this. So all of that stuff actually relates and means something to the client. And that just that simple screen, we have found that clients have gone back and looked at over time in different ways. And it's powerful, right? But the fact that it's their own journey just makes it completely different, right? It's just, and there's so much more we can do, but that's just a really simple example of where we've got great interaction with clients about their own, being able to play with their own information or ask questions around.
It also helps you show the value of your advice and the value of sticking to the plan over time. That I think is so powerful out of all of that.
Yeah, and the beauty with your tech, that's at a high level. If I change down into a particular client, and I don't know whether these ones had changed accounts. No, I haven't. But if they had moved product to product, had rolled from super to pension, and actually changes shades of, there we go, changes shades of the color and shows, so we can actually see when events happened, right? And what's gone on through time. And then that is also part of the understanding of the journey. I went from accumulation to drawdown phase or whatever it may be. I think that's been fantastic.
I didn't even know you'd done that. That is pretty cool. The comment you made earlier, Jace, just to add to that, is all of that is really powerful for the advisors to be able to walk through that with the client, but it's also great that the client can access that themselves, even just for now when you share a copy of this with them. It's probably worth just making that clear to everybody that what you can share right now is interactive and the clients can view it, and we're tracking everything that they do. So, they spent 10 minutes looking at that thing, that slide we're just looking at and playing with it. All of that intel is brought back in to know what's actually resonating with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one other thing, just while we're talking about differences, I'll show a different sort of interactive, but some clients like numbers, some clients like pictures, right? With a Word document, I've got to decide one or the other or both, and things get very busy. So here's an example of something that can be really complicated, an asset allocation type chart. So I can choose to show the chart as a pie chart at a high level, and I can then break it up to different pieces, right? Or if the client likes numbers, I can show it in tabular form, right? But this is where it gets powerful when I'm having conversations about the value that we do. Here's what you currently got. Here's what you're targeting. Again, if I want to look at that in column chart form, I can break it out. So here's what you've currently, I can turn these on and off. Here's what you've currently got. Here's what we're targeting. We're going to make some transactions that get you back in line, for example, this one, and I can go down into detail. So it's really great that that's simple. There's no way I could do that with a piece of paper, right? I'd have to have 8 pages to display what I can do in one screen. And if the client doesn't want to go there, it doesn't have to. I don't have to do extra work to produce it. It's just reusing data and information in a way that can be used in, you know, multiple situations or multiple ways of consumption.
Just conscious of time, I want to make sure we leave enough time for some questions, and there are some coming through now. But I just wanted to quickly make sure we've covered off the regulatory stuff. I know Ben, you touched on those a little bit, but I do know there can be concerns over whether digital documents tick all the boxes. You've talked about some of those things already, Ben. Was there anything you wanted to add there?
No, I think if you go to the Corporations Act, if you go to RG 90, which is the sample SOA regulatory guide, if you go to RG 175, the language and the terms that ASIC use are all technology agnostic. So there's absolutely nothing stopping anybody using digital tools, using videos, using audio, using graphical information to provide the advice to the client. We've just traditionally always done paper because when the Corporations Act came about, that's what we used. And the benefit of using digital tools is because, as I said earlier, what ASIC actually wants to know is that the client understands the advice and the client consents to the advice and the advice is right for the client. Disclosure is important and you have to have it there, but it's not ultimately what is going to make ASIC or make AFCA make decisions for or against you. It's the outcome for the client. And so to be able to scale the information like Jason just showed, where if a client understands growth, defensive splits, that's perfect. That's as much information as you need to provide. But if they want to get into the nitty-gritty detail of how much is in domestic shares and how much is in international shares and which actual shares are being bought and sold to change the portfolio, being able to scale the advice in and out in that way is a much more powerful message and will be much more defensible if ASIC or AFCA come knocking. And I think the other bit that you said, Aaron, which is probably easy to miss, but is so critically valuable to financial planners and to licensees, is that audit trail. And the fact that you can actually see the client has spent time on that slide. If the client comes back 5 years later and says, you never explained that to me, you never told me that, and you can go back and you can have a look and the client can, and you can demonstrate, well, actually, no, we spent 5 minutes talking about this concept and you clicked this button through the process that acknowledged you understood it. And then I can see that over the years, you've gone back to it 4 or 5 times and you have spent 10 minutes and 15 minutes and 5 minutes looking at it. That's a really powerful defensive tool that you can have in your toolkit as well to protect you if a regulator comes or an AFCA, you get to an AFCA type complaint.
Yeah.
I always think of it as the 2 halves of compliance. Give them the right content, hope, and do your best to help them understand it in the first place. Yeah. And then you won't have any problems, but the audit trail kind of covers you on the other side.
Absolutely. And you know, I speak to ASIC regularly and I speak to AFCA regularly, and they always say to me that if we can see that the client actually understood it, then we will turn around and we will support you. And most complaints happen when the client forgets what they knew or what they understand or can't remember how it all worked. If you've got a tool that allows them to go back in and experience and interact with it and remember what it is, they won't have a complaint because they'll go, oh, that's right. I remember why Jason recommended that for me. And I remember why we made those decisions, and I can see the outcomes of those decisions at those times.
Yeah, and to pick up on that, Ben, one of the other, like, it can be built if you plan ahead, which was one of your points earlier, and think about what the outcome is be. It can be planned to be incremental. So, for example, financial service, FSCGs, right, that we have to send out that get changed because things change. If delivered via LivePreso through a statement of advice, I can update that and still keep the history of the version that I delivered at any point inside that presentation, right? So this idea and this understanding, oh yes, you clicked on and you saw the information regarding complaints or whatever it is, or PDS delivery, which books or PDFs that are sent by email, and you wouldn't have a clue. I know I sent them, but do we really know the clients understood them? By embedding that through a hot link that may be using, say an informed investor type service, which has got some video, I can actually keep track of what was done, when it was linked, when it was done, and I've got evidence. And so it's evidence because not just for compliance, it's evidence of understanding, right? So I can be comfortable that if the client has reviewed this and spent some time, that they more than likely understood what we were talking about. And so we can continue to build on that process rather than go, well, I think they got it, and 30 years of experience says that I think they understood it. But this is verification and further enhancement of that, which I think cannot be. And at the end of this, because this was a presentation, at the end of this, the way that is delivered from a software point of view is I will get an email when I stop this presentation that will send back to me and say, these were the slides that viewed, these were how long they looked at, this is the time and the date stamp. And then when I share it, I get an incremental email that says, now the clients looked at it, they did it at this time. And if I send it out, I can send it out with a link for Don and Den. So I know whether Don opened it or Den opened it and where they looked at. So there's so much granular information that's exciting, that's useful for me as well as audit trail and compliance, because I know whether they did or didn't participate in and engage in the process.
Yeah. Right. So we've got a few questions coming in from the audience here. First one to clarify, is the advice still produced in Xplan or in an Xplan wizard, then the data comes into LivePreso? There's a longer thing here, but it's all about the same kind of topic. Yeah, the answer is LivePreso is not an advice tool, so we don't do anything that Xplan or anything like it does in terms of holding data, generating projections, or what any type of advice itself. We pull in data from Xplan and any other system where data is that's important, and that can, unfortunately, in our world, there are a lot of Excel sheets still, even with some of our multinational customers. There are some Excel in the mix. So data comes in and produces the kind of content that Jason's been showing us. So we're kind of like the interactive presentation layer for whatever's behind the scenes in the business. And so, Ben, you mentioned before that you got to design your tech stack. We obviously deal with a lot of different companies' tech stacks. We're often the kind of glue in between them in a way, because we have customers with 8 different things we've integrated with behind the scenes, but all that their customer sees is a really seamless piece of content that they can interact with. They don't need to know that behind the scenes it's going all over the place and data's flying here and there, but it's about kind of bringing that together to be able to create the experiences we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a really ugly analogy, but you hit generate in Xplan, and at the moment most licensees it generates into a Word document. What this does is generate it into more of a presentation style interactive tool.
Yeah. And this, I think the important thing in here is that what you've seen today is something that every slide is like an individual return of some information. So at some point we have decided as FYG, this is the information we want to display on that page, for want of a better term, and this is where it sits in Xplan. So bring it in. The beauty of it is that when it comes in, I don't have to take the visual in the way that Xplan generates. I just take the data and generate it in a way that we'd like to. So we're not tied into the way that they generate a portfolio progress chart or the way they generate an asset allocation chart, for example. It's about data and pointing, but you've got to plan and decide what that is, and that's been an exercise. It's not an off-the-shelf, here's a funky thing, go and grab it. It's how we can think about, rather than use a wizard and merge a Word document, what other things could I do? And so I can grab it from the moment we're just grabbing from Xplan, but we're already starting to think about other places that we store information that we might want to bring into LivePreso for the purposes of strategy recommendation or whatever the case may be. For example, PDSs that I talked about a minute ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other half of this question, I think it's worth pointing out that when we talk about data, you tend to think of numbers and charts, but that also in this case includes blocks of text and disclosures and all of the kind of important compliant text, typically, that often comes out of Xplan, some field in Xplan where that's stored for the group or the practice, and that automatically ends up in the right place on a slide or a page, in the same way that any other kind of data does it. That can include those goals that Jason was showing, it can, any kind of information. So data is definitely not just numbers and charts, although that's very important.
To give an example, I'll just share one last slide. We've been working on getting our clients to engage through a portal. So here's a slide that was generated that displays visually through a GIF that what is inside that portal. So when we're actually talking to clients, we can share this, and here, click here, link for more information. It clicks to a website that actually shows them where to get the app, how-to videos. And so it can drag information from everywhere. It's what information we want that actually makes it easier for our clients to understand or engage with the information in a different way. And so that's just another thing that we've been able to add to the LivePreso stack to actually pass that information off, because that's far more engaging than sending them a website link, right? So we can package it and control it in a different way.
So the next question, I note that the graphics and navigation deal with the client's current situation and historical data. Is it possible to see how recommendations are displayed? There might be one for you, Jason. Yeah,
well, the only one I've probably got, I'll just show a quick portfolio recommendation, but the answer is yes. At the moment, the deck that I'm showing it as is like our record of advice or a review type deck. So it's dealing with existing clients, not someone that's brand new. Our next evolution is to go down and start to bring some of that concept stuff in. Actually, that itself is an important point, and you did briefly touch on this earlier, but it's probably worth just everyone knowing that the way FYG's approach this is by starting with an ROA use case, with the intention of incrementally growing that out to cover more advice documents and use cases like Jason was saying. Yeah, and so if because the previous one we talked about asset allocation and we want to change something to get them in line, I can break down which investment, and here's the transactions that I am doing in the middle of the screen to change that portfolio. Obviously, in this case, there's new money coming in this example, which is why it adds up to different numbers. But that sort of information. But the beauty is that the next step is that we have an interactive list. The thing about LivePreso that you could also remember or think about is that it doesn't have to be data. It can be data that I build on a fly. So we've got this slide in there where I'm able to take notes or make comments about something that the client's going to do. Buying a new car for whatever it is, X $55 or something, and I give it a date, and I can build that out as an increment and a message and add this. And so this information is then there. So this information I've gained during a conversation or actions we've agreed to as we go. But some of those actions can be automated. So for example, if the client says, yes, I'm happy for this advice to go ahead, and we go, yes, I'm happy to implement that, I hit that button and it automatically populates this list that we're going to implement the changes as recognized. Now, when I, essentially then confirmation, I've got an acknowledgement, right? The next evolution of this could push into a platform to actually place those trades, right? There's all sorts of stuff that this stuff could start to do, but I think that it doesn't just have to be about information that's static that I re-engage with. It can actually live and breathe and grow on the fly, and that's actually been really useful as well as part of the experience.
To that point as well, Jason, maybe this is an idea for you to think about, but all of your fee disclosure statements and all of your fee consent forms, you can do. You can do it this way. Provide the information. The client can go, I agree, and there's your consent signed off to the client.
Yeah, their next developments that we're planning for our fee disclosure, consent, and FS and financial services guide to be done this way, because they just lend itself to being able to put the information out and be also understanding and engaging in how we get responses to it.
Yeah. A couple of other questions. Do you still get an old school document? Yes, you can. It's an option. It's an option in our platform. Some of our customers decide to not make that available, but a lot do. So everything is delivered digitally first, but there is an option for the client to make a PDF for printing. So that is something that's available as long as you don't choose to turn it off.
So just to add to that, we've done a lot of research as part of our Future of the SOA report, and we're just, for FPA members, we're releasing the video SOA project and report as we're doing it. We've done a lot of consumer research. Clients don't like to read SOAs, but they will read them 3 or 4 times because they want to understand the advice, and they want to understand how they want to reduce the information asymmetry between you as the professional and them as the client. And they'll read a paper-based SOA 3 or 4 times. It's not because they want to, it's because they feel that's the way they need to understand. If you can provide anything to them that allows them to understand the advice more quickly and more easily, and dig into more particular things more deeply, but other things at a higher level, they much prefer to receive advice in that format. They don't want paper-based documents. They'll take them if that's all you're offering, but they would much prefer videos, and they would much prefer interactive documents and tools, and they would much prefer to have something that they can show friends and family if they need to, which will get you more clients as well.
And I think that's important that we started with the idea that we needed to produce a piece of paper, like we needed to capture this as a piece of paper. I personally have gone away from that as a requirement, because it's with this particular platform, every presentation is a unique link that's kept forever. And so I can always go back. And so sharing that link and capturing that link inside the database, and then incrementally from that point, is the best way for me, I think, going forward, because it's really difficult to turn something that's got multiple layers and sub slides and whatever into a really nice, neat PDF. And you can spend a lot of time for something that I don't think down the track is going to have a huge lot of value.
Yeah, and it's probably obvious, but you lose 2 other things by making PDF. One, it's no longer interactive, obviously, and we've talked a lot about how important that is to engage the customers and help them understand. But secondly, you can't track a PDF. So our platform tracks if someone downloads the PDF, but we have no idea what happens after that. Whereas, as we've said a few times today, if they come back to one of the prezos, as we call them, over the years, we know every single time they looked at it and what they looked at, which slides they looked at and for how long, and all that stuff that we're talking about before.
Yeah. But just to get really extreme, we've got a member who only delivers video SOAs.
Yeah. So,
no presentations, no documents, no nothing. All they deliver is a video SOA. So anything between paper and a video SOA is compliant and doable, and it just probably depends on your client's preferences ultimately.
A very quick question from Anya. Do the actions that Jason was showing get stored against the CRM? I believe right now they don't go automatically back. That is one of the things on the list.
So we automatically create a note inside the database with the link stored against it, and ultimately we're just making decisions on whether it should automate. I'm more inclined to think it will automate things like transactional processes rather than tasks, if you like, inside. But there's no reason it couldn't do all of that.
We do.
Where do you go next? Yeah,
we do that in other industries quite commonly. Capturing actions like Jason showed in different situations, and creating tasks in systems like Salesforce or Dynamics in other industries where they're really important. So anything, workflow integration like that is really powerful. Right, so we're just over time now. Just wanted to say thanks to Ben and thanks to Jason for joining us, and thanks to Steph, who's been working in the background putting all this together and feeding us the questions. So there will be a recording of this available. I think it'll be sent out to you automatically with a link. but we'll also make it available to anyone who wants to have a look at it. And thanks